on this episode of Indiana Education Insight.
Everyone on the job is focused on we've got to do the job right the first time so we don't come back. But we have to get it done as quickly as possible because time is money. And so if we can cut the schedule in half, that saves, in some cases, millions of dollars.
Every week, the Indiana Association of Public School Superintendents is taking you inside today's Indiana education collaboration and tomorrow's education trends. We're staying on the pulse of public school innovators throughout Indiana and beyond. Join our conversation and contribute to our upcoming topics at IAPSSIN.org/podcast. Here's your host, Dr. J.T. Coopman.
Thanks for joining us on today's episode of Indiana Education Insight. I'm Dr. J.T. Coopman, Executive Director of the IAPSS. This podcast is being delivered by our IPSS team and produced by our friends at Edge Media Studios. As the Executive Director of IPSS, I'm excited to bring you this weekly show where we feature Indiana education innovators from all over our great state, from students to superintendents. We'll also be talking to higher education leaders and educators at the state level as we work together as proactive public education advocates. That's why IPSS is here and why we are proud to bring you this show. Every week, we're talking about trending topics in the public education space while bringing in Indiana education innovators to hear their perspective. As with any organization, it takes great leadership to be successful, and that is one of the main missions of IAPSS, developing great school district leaders. It's always great to have experienced and passionate educators joining the show, so let's get started with today's conversation.
Topics and trends in Indiana education.
Today's guest is Mr. Tim Thoman, CEO and President of Performance Services. As well as numerous public speaking engagements, he has been instrumental in shaping the conversation about Indiana public school construction and has the ability to look at education from various lenses, which is very important. Of course, he has been a tremendous asset to public education in Indiana. Let's find out how he views some of the issues in Indiana public schools. Welcome to the show today, Tim. We appreciate you being here. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and Performance Services?
Well, thank you, Dr. Coopman. I appreciate you inviting me, and it's just an honor to be here. So as far as myself, I was raised on the north side of Indianapolis and went to Purdue University and graduated as a mechanical engineer. Worked for Johnson Controls and Siemens before starting Performance Services 20 years ago. Okay. So we've grown from me, one person, to 175 now. And we were at one office for most of those 20 years. But now we have 9 offices and are going through a national expansion, kind of in the center of the country, so kind of Wisconsin, Michigan down to Texas. And this year we just added North Carolina. Okay. So in our company, we really do a couple things. One is guaranteed energy savings contracts, which are design-build contracts, but with performance guarantees. We do design-build contracts, which is kind of new square footage, renovation, non-energy related stuff normally. Sure. And then energy leadership, which is working with schools to help them reduce utility costs just through running their systems and behaving differently. Mm-hmm. And within the guaranteed contract offering, over the last couple of years, there have been a lot of solar systems installed, and it's kind of neat when we're able to, whether through a wind system or a solar system, we're able to almost take schools off the grid. So that's really exciting.
That is exciting, and there's huge cost savings for schools as their utility bills. So we appreciate you doing that for not only Indiana schools, but in the other states that you're getting into, because I know they'll appreciate it as well. So what is design build as it applies to Indiana schools?
So design build, by definition, is a project delivery method in which one entity forges a single contract with an owner And that entity is responsible for everything.
Okay.
So they have sole accountability. So they're responsible for the architectural work, the engineering work, the construction management, hiring all the subcontractors, all the equipment, and then commissioning and optimization. So it's kind of cradle to grave responsibility, but the power of that sole accountability results in some pretty neat things that we can deliver to schools.
Okay. That takes some expert talent to do all of those things, and I know that your staff they're all experts, and so we appreciate that definition. How does it differ from the traditional plan of spec and bid, and what advantages does it offer?
So I think some of the most significant differences are, first and foremost, again, that sole accountability. So a school can hold one entity accountable for everything, and that eliminates a lot of change orders because, if we're responsible for the design, the equipment, the contractors, the construction, there's really no one else to blame, right? So we've kind of landed on this approach of guaranteeing no change orders. Also, we get to handpick the contractors, and so in our team. So the team that we bring in is a team that wants to work together. Usually, in most cases, we've worked with these partners before, so we know they're very good at what they do. And there's a lot of power and synergy when you get experts from all these different areas to come together and try to best solve a customer's facility needs.
Right. Recently, Indiana has adopted the CM at risk model, and Indiana did not have that model up until about a year or two ago. What's the difference between CM at risk and a design build model that you just described?
Okay, so I think just for clarification, so construction management at risk is a form of traditional bidding with a slight difference. So traditional bidding, you have an architect and engineer that work for the owner, sometimes a construction manager that works for the owner, but then the owner would have multiple contracts going to them. So the owner normally is responsible for all of these contracts plus all of these designers, and when there's a problem amongst any of those direct contracts and relationships, the owner has to figure it out.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And the construction manager and architect help with that. But what has happened is whenever you have multiple people responsible for one outcome, when there's a problem, it's very difficult to find out who's responsible, and rarely do people voluntarily accept responsibility. So with construction management at risk, it solves part of that problem in that all of the contractors have a direct contract with the construction manager. So now the owner has a contract with the construction manager at risk and then contracts with their design partners. So there's still split accountability, but it's much cleaner than the traditional plan and spec bidding.
Okay, all right. Well, I have certainly known you and your work for some time, and I know that you pride yourself in that guaranteed performance piece. And if it doesn't work out for any reason, you accept that responsibility and you make sure that the owner is satisfied with the delivery of your services. So I think just from a reputation perspective, you have earned that through a lot of hard work, but you've also hired a lot of talent to make sure that that works for you. So we appreciate that in Indiana schools, so thank you for that.
Thank you, Dr. Cooper.
What is progressive design build, and how does it differ from a traditional design build?
Okay, so it's very similar to traditional design build. So you get all of the benefits of lower cost, higher quality, and faster schedule. The difference is that the selection of the design builder is made much earlier in the process.
Okay.
And the reason that's valuable and important is really kind of threefold. First, it reduces a lot of the cost and time that schools currently spend interviewing 3 different companies through almost full designs. And so it takes a lot of time to develop those designs, and so it's a lot of effort on the school's part prior to selecting, knowing who you're going to work with.
Sure.
The other side from the school's perspective is some schools say, I wish we would have had less of that kind of time where you're determining who to work with and more time sitting down with the successful design builder and their collaborative team, going through the specific needs of the school and collaboratively coming up with the best design. And what's really nice about design build is that it's not just our architect and engineer, our constructors and subcontractors. We have the entire team working with the school to land on the way to get exactly what they want or as much of what they want for the budget. The other advantage is, and this is more from an industry perspective, is that when some companies in the industry will not pursue design build projects primarily because it costs so much money. So it costs about half of a complete design to compete on a traditional design build project. And so in some cases, you're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars that companies are investing, and only one of the three end up winning. So everyone on the two losing teams loses a ton of time and money, and it's really painful. So what's nice about progressive design build is that selection is made earlier such that the investment is minimal. And we think that that will, A, be more fair to the construction industry, but also result in more competition.
Right. Well, I'm glad you pointed that out, Tim, because that was one of the issues that I had with that traditional model is that there were people out there that were spending hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they may or may not get the project. So I really like you explaining that and defining that for our audience, because I think that's an important point to be made. So what advantages does progressive design build offer Indiana schools?
So I think from a customer's perspective, one is you get all the benefits of design build. So with the lower cost, higher quality, faster schedule, no change orders, but it's easier to do. So in other words, less time consuming up front. It's more collaborative, which schools that we've been working with through Progressive Design Build have really enjoyed. And but you still get the sole accountability. So at the end of the day, one company is accountable for delivering the results, and if those results aren't delivered, it's not hard to figure out who needs to step forward.
Sure. You know, one of the things that's, or a couple of the things that are at top of my mind when we talk about schedule and materials and those kinds of things is that there are some things that are kind of out of your control. For instance, you know, who saw the tariffs coming and what steel prices would do or aluminum. And certainly the labor market in construction is in flux right now. How do you deal with those kinds of issues?
So we have an open book pricing methodology that we use with our customers. And so you're right. I mean, no one is immune to some of these cost increases. With the unemployment rate at record low levels and the tariffs with China, costs are just really going up. And so what we try to do first off is be conservative with our estimates. So schools don't get their hopes up in terms of a very large scope of work beyond what the markets can support. But at the same time, we want to be as accurate as possible and give them a realistic picture of what they're going to receive. And that's part of the value of having the contractors involved all along, because they're able to price that work as we go so that they don't end up hoping they're going to get 30% more work than they can end up affording. And so, and because we do the open book pricing, the owner sees all of the material costs, the actual bids, the subcontractor costs. They work with us. We kind of co-select who's going to work on the project. And so what it does is it gives schools far more control over the process than they would normally have. And, you know, when you think about the value of being able to pick good contractors and making sure you select equipment that will work for your district, but then have someone take full, even though you've made the selections, take full accountability for the end result. So that's kind of a neat aspect to this progressive design build approach.
Well, and I would assume, Tim, that because you are working with these contractors and they know how you work and and they have that level of satisfaction in working with you, perhaps that's a better model for schools to look at, because they know that they're going to get the best contractor out there and that you're going to help them with that. So again, that to me, that's advantageous for everybody. Why would it exacerbate a schedule, and how does that faster schedule mean savings for a school district?
So all the national research indicates that with design build, the schedule is about twice as fast on average of traditional plan and spec bidding. Part of that is when you have an integrated team that wants to work together and is used to working together.
Right.
You can just be far more efficient in getting work done.
Right.
The other thing is that financially, because we're not paid for how many months we're on the job site,
Right.
we're paid for the job.
Yep.
We have to do the job for what we've agreed to, and if there are cost overruns, then we have to eat those. Everyone on the job is focused on we've got to do the job right
Yep.
the first time so we don't come back.
Yep.
But we have to get it done as quickly as possible because time is money. And so it's not just our project manager's time, but every subcontractor has a project manager.
Yep.
And so if we can cut the schedule in half, that saves, in some cases, millions of dollars. The other benefit is that equipment cost is going up significantly every year. So if we can shorten a project from 2 years to 1 year, then on the equipment side, that may be a 5 or 6 or 7% savings. And some materials have been going up much faster than that.
Sure.
So there's, and the other piece is, I think if you look at traditional construction, and it's in their defense, a construction manager has to build a schedule based on the worst possible contractor, because you don't know who you're going to get.
Right.
So if you build an aggressive schedule and you get a bad contractor, it can throw off your entire schedule and really be problematic for an owner. So they build in a lot of extra time
Right.
because they don't know. The other piece is that in design build, we're motivated to get the job done quickly. With traditional procurement, because like a construction manager gets paid by the month in the trailer, then speeding up that process does not reduces their income. And I'm not suggesting that schedules are delayed because companies want to make more money. I'm just suggesting that there's not an economic incentive to speed up a project.
Sure. Yep.
And there's also the extra benefit of making sure that no matter how bad the contractors are that end up being winning the low bid, that they have a good chance of at least meeting the schedule at the end of the day.
Right. I agree with that. There's a term that I'm familiar with, and perhaps you can define this term a little bit better for our audience, and that's called value engineering. Where does that whole idea come into play with what you're talking about with schedule?
So it can be there can be two types of value engineering. One type is that you land on the exact design you want, but it's over budget, so you have to cut things out and make different choices. The other kind of value engineering, or really value design, I suppose, which is what we focus on, is letting the customer know all along what it's going to cost, all these different decisions, and then also working not just with the designers, but the contractors to say, hey, how could we accomplish that same architectural look or feel or functionality for less money, or with a system that will be easier to maintain or that will last longer. Sure. So there are always these questions about quality and functionality and maintenance, which in a lot of ways the contractors know more about that than the architects. The architects, of course, are trained and their primary responsibility is to see the big picture, provide a design that really works well.
Right.
But there is value in understanding the components and so forth. So I think really it's more kind of value design versus value engineering with our approach.
Right.
So that so it's not cutting from the ideal. It's developing and arriving at the ideal in terms of how much money does a customer have, and what do they want to accomplish.
Sure. Yeah, and we'll get to some of those other points that you just brought up here in just a second. So why would it result in a higher quality design and construction with this process?
So I think as far as quality, people matter.
Right.
Okay, so contractors matter, and so by being able to select the contractors that are proven, that have a vested interest in performing, and they know if they don't perform for us, number one, we're going to replace them, and it's going to come out of their contract. But secondly, they won't get the next job or the next 5 jobs.
Right.
So everyone on our team is heavily incentivized to deliver excellence. Yeah. I think also as far as quality, the idea of getting not just the designers, but the people that are used to installing and maintaining the systems, getting everyone together and figuring out the best solution. It's just a broader perspective, and we think delivers better results.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. Is there any industry data from independent third parties to support what we're talking about in relationship to design build?
Yeah, so in 1998, Penn State University did a study considering 351 buildings, non-residential buildings across the country. And I think the range was from like 10,000 square feet up to 2 million square feet. And half were traditional plan and spec, half were design build. And what they landed on in terms of an end result was that design build cost 6% less, had a quality of 10% higher, and also had a schedule that was 33% faster.
Wow.
Then the U.S. Department of Commerce did a similar assessment, and they landed on the summary, kind of a confirmation, which is they found that with design build, costs were less, quality was higher, and schedule was faster. So that's why so much work now in the federal government is design build. Recently, as a matter of fact, just this past year, the University of Colorado, Boulder, and Florida University kind of reinvestigated all of the data to bring it up to current results and current data. And so the results of that were the same across the board in terms of lower cost, higher quality, faster schedule, but percentage of the different design build versus construction management risk versus plan and spec are continuing to change. And so in 1985, design build represented 5% of the non-residential construction. It's now up to 44%.
Wow.
Plan and spec was 82%. It's down to 13%. And construction management at risk is up to 35%. So so there's been a huge shift nationally, and the question is, well, what's driving this?
Sure.
And the answer is lower cost, higher quality, faster schedule.
Yep, makes sense to me. Makes sense. Those are fascinating statistics, Tim, and I appreciate you sharing those with our audience. It makes sense to have one entity responsible for all aspects of a project. However, there is no third party keeping an eye on the projects. How would you respond to such a concern coming from school districts?
So we get that often, and the way we look at it is that whenever a school does a construction project, they have to trust someone. Okay, so if you do a traditional project, you're trusting your architect, and if you have a construction manager, your construction manager. And with design build, you have to trust the design builder. So in both cases, there's trust. Now, with the traditional process, or even construction management at risk, you're trusting them to do their best, which they try to do their best.
Yep.
But they're somewhat handcuffed in that they only have partial control and responsibility.
Yep.
So if there's a bad contractor, that can really mess up a project. And also the architect or engineer can't control the construction manager. So those trusted people, even if they do their absolute best, still are limited in terms of them being able to assure the customer they're going to deliver an excellent project. Yep. They can just commit to delivering excellence in the area. Okay, so what's nice about design build is, yes, you have to trust the design builder. And as a matter of fact, the Design Build Institute of America, which is a group of owners, architects, engineers, design builders, came together, it was over 30 years ago, to say, hey, how can we perfect design build, make it as valuable as possible? And they do a tremendous amount of research. And one of the outcomes through the research has been that the number one factor in terms of successful design build projects is the who, or the company that is selected.
Yeah.
And so this idea of trusting someone, that's really, really important, and you have to get that right. That's really almost more important than everything else.
Yep.
But what's neat is that if you select the right company, the right person, and they're committed to delivering the project on time, on budget, to making it perform the way that's been promised, they have full control of that, and they can deliver that. And often with our customers, we not only commit to getting it done by a certain date, and sticking within the budget, no change orders, but additionally, we can guarantee the learning environment. So the consistent temperatures, good air quality, appropriate humidity levels, appropriate illumination levels. So really all of the aspects that affect the learning environment can be guaranteed as well. And so what's nice for schools is they can sit back and say, yes, you promised us this building, and all these details that we've requested,
Right.
but you also said that it would be done on time, on budget, and it would work really well.
Yep.
And if something's not working, it's like, they come to us and say, you need to figure it out, which we do.
Right.
So in some ways, it allows schools to focus more on being educators. They know what they want, but not having to get into the construction world and figure out whose fault is it that there's a change order. And often, again, schools build in up to 5% contingency to deal with those change orders.
Yeah, yeah. All excellent points, Tim. I appreciate that explanation. How much involvement do school personnel have in selecting designs, materials, and other aspects of the project with a progressive design build to make sure they get exactly what they want and how it will work for them?
So so a lot is the answer. So we would sit down with the client, especially with progressive design build, with conceptual designs, and then work through first the program aspects. It has to work really well for them.
Right.
But as they change the program, we're telling them the impact it's having on cost, so that we don't, again, end up with them loving some concept they can't afford.
Sure.
And then it gets more and more detailed as time goes on.
Right.
And we also bring in the staff and the department heads, because in some cases, the little things matter, and getting the project exactly the way they want is down to every single room.
Sure.
And only the people that are in those rooms kind of really know, because they live it day in, day out.
Yep.
So we get very granular in that regard, but it's this process of an iterative process of several meetings with the customer until the design is finalized and the customer says, this is it, and then we move forward.
Okay. All right. That makes sense. And the owner is actually part of the process, and they own the process along with you. So I think it's an excellent process that you have in mind there. Why is design build less risky than other delivery methods?
I think the sole accountability is the main piece, because if you think about risk, if you're a school district, the risk is, in general, no matter who you go with, there should be a design that meets the basic program needs, because the school's been involved with a designer, and even though it may not be perfect, at least it'll be in the ballpark. But the bigger factors are, in terms of an unsuccessful project, is the project goes way over budget and the school can't afford, and it has to make painful cuts. The project's not done on time and the kids can't come back to school, or other accommodations have to be made.
Right.
The building doesn't work when it's done. We see this all the time, where new buildings 3, 4, 5 years down the road still aren't comfortable, still have kind of issues, problems, roof leaks, whatever that is.
Right.
And so if you're talking about a successful project where when it will be done on time and it will work the way that it was promised, and all of the guarantees in terms of energy efficiency, the optimal environments, all of that is being assured by the design builder, then If there are problems, then that gets remedied by the design builder at no cost to the school. And so I think having that assurance to know that no matter what happens, this building is going to be done on time and it's going to work really well, that eliminates a lot of the risk of a new building or a renovation.
You know, that 100% satisfaction guaranteed kind of a thing kind of makes it a no-brainer, at least in my mind. Would you agree with that?
Well, I do. But, I would say that I think many companies in our industry have that commitment to do whatever it takes for the customer. But with design build, we're uniquely positioned because we control it all.
Sure.
Again, so we can tell the customer we will deliver a successful project because we control it all versus if we only control the piece of it, the design or the construction or the contractors or the equipment. So by controlling it all, we're able to make those commitments and then deliver on those commitments.
Yeah, makes sense to me. If design build is a better delivery method than others, do you know the percentage of all of the projects in the country that go with design build?
So again, it's right now the 44% of all non-residential projects go design build. 35% are construction management risk, and 13% are traditional plan and spec.
Well, that's a big switch from years ago.
It is. Yeah, it's a huge switch. So in 1985, plan and spec was 82% of the market. Now they're 13. Design build was only 5%. Now it's 44%. Yeah. I'm not sure where construction management risk was in 85, but now it's at 35%. And it's growing slowly. It's grown over the last 20 years. It's grown about 3% in popularity.
Right.
But but design build is definitely is the dominant way people get work done in the commercial space, in the institutional space. And again, it's just driven by lower cost, higher quality and faster schedule.
Yeah, I think it makes sense to me. How many design build projects have you done specifically in Indiana?
So with Indiana schools, we've done 45 design build projects. I'm a little unclear on how many have been done in the state overall, but I've got to believe, of course, it's significantly larger than that. So there are dozens of buildings of all different types that schools can, and we provide the reference list on all of our customers. So if someone's concerned about, hey, it sounds great, but I want to talk to my peers, we have several numbers or a ton of numbers to that people can call.
Well, I know your client satisfaction is high, and you have a number of your clients that can provide testimony for what you do and how you do it. In relationship to traditional design build versus progressive design build, can you tell us a little bit about how many of your projects have moved from traditional to progressive?
So almost all of our newer projects are progressive design build. So we have 7 projects over the last kind of year and a half that have gone progressive design build. The customers have been thrilled. I mean, so it has eliminated, again, even though we had a lot of successful projects with traditional design build, they would still say it's worth it in the end, but man, it was a lot of work getting there.
Right.
And then what we were starting to see too in the industry is less and less competition because it costs so much to deliver a design build proposal that we just started getting less competition. And I think schools like a highly competitive environment wherever possible.
Okay. So as a means of comparison, have the projects that you've used progressive design build turned out, in your opinion, better than the traditional?
Yeah, so they have from 2 perspectives. One is by having more time sitting shoulder to shoulder with the customer, we have a clearer understanding of what they want. And so when we come in, if we win a traditional design build proposal, we already have a building design. Now we can modify that building, but it's harder than if we start from scratch with kind of the customer. The other thing is, and this was really disappointing for me, we had a very successful project with a customer, and we were ahead of schedule, came in under budget. Most of the administrators were thrilled, most of them, but a few, even now, are disappointed with the design build process. And the reason was that one of the 2 competitors we were competing with had offered everything that the school had asked for. So everything on the wish list they had indicated would be included. And at the last minute, in the final proposal, when they had to actually put, their money behind it, they cut almost all of that out. And so we were selected, and the assessment was they were getting over $2 million more of value as a large project from our offering versus the competitors. And the project again went well, but what remained with this principle was I didn't get what I was supposed to get with the design build project, and we just can't control. So we can't control that. We can't control what a competitor does. And so if you look at this goal of ours, which is to have design build be this amazing experience for schools and to give schools the most value for the dollar, part of that is controlling the expectations. And again, with progressive design build, we can do that. But this was an example where we thought we did everything right, and still there was some dissatisfaction.
Yeah. Construction is a tricky business, and things change, oftentimes things out of your control. And so those things happen, but I know that you provide a good product. In closing, anything that you want to cover that we haven't covered with any of our questions or issues that we brought up to our audience?
No, I would just say that if these concepts make sense and that it's something you'd like to consider, just please give us a call, and we'd love to have that conversation about just what is design build, what's progressive design build, how would it work. We could put you in contact with other schools, your peers that have gone through it, and they can give you probably even more valuable information on that. And also we've been members of IAPSS for decades, and we're just thankful for that partnership. And we're thankful, Dr. Coopman, for your leadership and just the opportunity to be part of this great organization.
Thank you. I appreciate you mentioning that, Tim, and we appreciate you and Performance Services and every member of your team. They're all great individuals and great supporters of Indiana School District leaders, and we appreciate that. So thank you. You mentioned getting in touch with you. Where's your office located?
So we're just on the north side of Indianapolis. So we're right off of 96th Street. So feel free to, give us a call, and you can stop by I know a lot of superintendents come to Indy often for various seminars and so forth. But yeah, we'd love to show you our office, and we'd love to host you. Okay.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that information. Well, thank you, Mr. Thoman, for being our guest on IAPSS's edition of Indiana Education Insight. We learned a great deal about construction by project design and probably some new terminology for some of our audience today. So I appreciate that information. Now it's time to wrap up this episode with my take on the current state of affairs in Indiana education landscape.
Dr. JT's closing comments.
As we enter this next session of the Indiana General Assembly, we need to focus on education issues such as testing that does not enhance learning but is used for how we evaluate schools and teachers. Do we really need a snapshot in time as a metric for evaluating public schools, teachers, and students? As such, we need to change the dialogue. Due to the complex issues associated with school reform, we need to engage our communities and have them help us develop a portrait of a graduate. As such, and is the process, it's important that we, as our final product, and we need to change the dialogue. We have so many educational issues requiring our attention, such as early childhood education, appropriate assessments, the teacher shortage, teacher pay, professional development, school security, resources for privatizing charter schools and vouchers in private schools. Our communities and parents need to engage and see how they can change the dialogue. With so much of the focus on the teacher shortage due to low pay, could we not shift the funding from a meaningless assessment system costing $100 million into the classrooms and pay teachers more? Through this public dialogue, it is my hope we can get our legislators and our state leaders to see the value of public schools and the nexus of promoting public schools and the economic development in Hoosier communities. I see these as times of investment and not expenditures for our children and our state. Perhaps we can pursue this issue and others in another segment. On our next show in February, our guest is yet to be determined, but I am sure our guest can provide some additional insight into the State House and education. Join us for that and more into the next Insight into Indiana Education. Thanks for being part of education. Please stand up for Indiana Public Schools.